Hey guys, Cinderrash here, and I am going to go over pretty much everything you need to know about Kyle, as well as how to progress with him, things you need to look out for when you're playing the game from normal mode all the way through hard mode, and just everything pretty much about this game that will help you get some of the stuff you need for Kyle, as well as some of the other Descendants you might do down the line, but with a heavy focus on Kyle. So, let's get started. So, Kyle is known as a bruiser. He is very much just a interesting character, as in there's only two bruisers in the game, with Glay being the SS tier broken character that she is, which the game devs don't believe she's broken because they believe she's where she should be, and Kyle being considered C tier for whatever reason. I personally believe that he is definitely at least A tier, maybe S tier, but I don't have everything I need exactly for him yet, but we're going to get to that later. Right now, what I want to do is I want to talk about his active skills, his passive skills, and how you can use these to both help your team, but also how Kyle kind of plays. You might notice that his name is the Controller, and that name could not be any closer to the truth than anything else in this game. You alone are going to be able to control the flow of battle with your team and against enemies in general. So let's start with the passive skill, and we'll double back between a bunch of the other skills as we explain how they work in conjunction with each other and how we can best utilize all of them together and when best to use these skills. Starting off with the passive skill, we have Experienced Technician. This is non-attribute, and all of his skills are non-attribute. Non-attribute means you don't have any specific damage type, obviously, so no fire, no toxic, no chill, and no electric. The maximum amount of magnetic force increase proportional to your max shield. When your max shield is fully consumed, you gain magnetic care. This effect has a cooldown, and magnetic force gradually decreases while out of combat. So, he is a special resource type of character, which is this magnetic force. So we don't use MP. So a lot of our base damage and a lot of our damage is going to be coming down from skill rotations and having a really low skill cooldown. As you can see over on the right, our cooldown baseline is 300 seconds, but with how much cooldown I have pumped on, it is almost cut down to 140 seconds, or we can even lower it a little bit further just to be generous and be a little more realistic and say it's close to 2 minutes, whereas 300 seconds is more like 5 minutes. So we've shaved off close to 3 minutes entirely just for this. Now, magnetic force, this is the purple bar that you will see me later on filling up and showing off a little bit more, is your damage meter, and how that's calculated is your max shield times 200%. So ideally, what we want to do is build this character with a lot of shields. Cost interval is 1 second, so this ticks pretty often, and a cost amount is your magnetic force times 1%. Very simple. Magnetic care, though, is a duration of 10 seconds, so the moment your shield breaks, this goes off for 10 seconds. Your recovery interval is 1 second, so it happens every second for 10 seconds. Your shield recovery is your max shield times 8%. So because this ticks for 8% over 10 seconds, we're healing 80% of our shield. And our magnetic force recovery is our max magnetic force times 8%. So we'll be able to build up a lot of this over time, and especially with how high our shields will get, this is very useful for dealing a lot of damage, but also keeping us safe and keeping our character safe, especially when our shield goes down. First up is our bread and butter skill. This is our most used skill, and it's going to be pretty much used on cooldown. So what this does is you charge forward to deal damage and inflict knockback on enemies. Perfect, because this also causes a little bit of stun. So we always want to be using this to kill really squishy enemies, and then of course just deal damage with it. Dealing damage to enemies recovers your magnetic force, which is our special meter use abilities, and we gain it proportional to our max shield. When the skill ends, which is the moment you hit an enemy, and the animation ends, you grant defense plus to yourself. So this ability has 3 stacks, which is really nice, because essentially it means you can constantly have your defense plus up on at all times. With enough cooldown, you can permanently have it up to keep your defense plus up. I almost have it there. I have it at 5.6 seconds, and the duration for defense plus is 5 seconds. And what defense plus does is it increases your defense by 150% of whatever your defense is. This is wonderful because this allows us to be very tanky, to be in the middle of the fight and do whatever we need to do to make sure that we are not dying, but better yet, also make sure that our teammates aren't dying. So you can move 10 meters with this skill, which isn't very, very far, but it's still pretty useful for the most part of getting you where you need to be, or just hitting enemies in general with it. The skill power is 432.7% baseline, but you can of course increase the damage with just any skill power modifier, and not just flat skill power. There's a huge difference on that, and basically what skill power modifier allows you to do is increase the baseline power, whereas skill power just increases your skill power by a set percentage. It's a little confusing, but I will have a link down below to a man who I consider to be a mathematical god who will be able to explain the difference between skill power and skill power modifier in case you have any questions. I personally don't understand a lot of it, but if you would like to learn, he will do his best to explain it. The magnetic force that you get from this is your max shield times 30%, so we'll be able to get about 30% of our full bar off using all 3 of our charges. So it's about 10% per shield bash charge. Next up is our shield. Now, this is called the magnetic bulwark. This extends both hands to create a barrier in front of you that blocks enemy ranged attacks. Every time the barrier blocks an attack, recover magnetic force proportional to the damage blocked. Now, because we don't have a resource that we actually use, this shield actually uses our shield to keep it up and keep the skill going. The cooldown doesn't really matter for this skill in particular, because you are only going to be using it for big enemies and big fights and big horde waves. So don't worry about using this skill all too much, as you're going to be using other skills in conjunction, but this is great for when you are trying to protect your teammates if they are pulling Colossi aggro, and especially if you have comms, it'll make this a lot easier, where they could just stand behind you, you tank all of it, you get a ton of magnetic force, they get a bunch of free damage, they don't got to worry about anything. It works great. Shield cost is just your max shield times 5% per second, and this thing lasts pretty much until you don't want it to last anymore, or 8 seconds is up. You can of course extend that duration if you really need to, but realistically 8 seconds is long enough that it should be able to block almost every current boss's barrage, whether it's Swamp Walker, Grave Walker, Dead Bride, Executioner, Pyromancer, any of those that are just going to be shooting a ton of rockets or beams or anything like that. You can put this up and block all of that damage. It also has defense based off of your own defense, so you want to make sure that you have a very high defense when you're using this ability, otherwise the shield can and will break, so keep that in mind. The HP is also 50% of your max shield, so again, why we need a lot of max shield on this character. Next up is your Magnetism spurt. When hit by enemies in a Magnetism spurt state, magnetic force is consumed instead of shield and HP. This is very beneficial because what we can use with this is our passive skill. So the moment that our shield gets broken, if we have magnetic force, we can click this button, apply it, and we'll gain back our entire 80% shield and not have to worry about it breaking again and going down. This in turn allows us to do a couple really neat things with this, such as get some clutch revives off, because we don't take any shield damage or any HP damage, we only lose our magnetic force damage, which is fine because it slowly ticks down anyway. This allows us to just also straight up regain our shields, as mentioned before, and it also does damage based off how much you soak, so it's really just nice overall. When all magnetic force is consumed, or by interacting with the skill button again, you can discharge it to deal damage. When the skill ends, you also restore shields to nearby allies proportional to your max shield. So, more often than not, what you might have happen is when a teammate goes down, you notice that they have an HP bar, and it immediately gets knocked down again because they don't have any shields. Well, you can fix that because the second you get them up, you can just press the button again and give them a ton of shields. It's really useful for making sure that your teammates just don't constantly keep going down and you have to keep reviving them. But it's also very risky if you have things targeting you and the other person, so keep that in mind that you might want to keep this up and just let them go down again, pick them back up, and then spurt it out, especially if you can get another teammate to take aggro. It'd be really, really nice with that. We want this to be as low as a cooldown as possible because we can basically keep this up indefinitely and use this for anything that we need and just basically become what I would like to call a dodge tank or a dodge rogue or just straight up, Escanor, from Seven Deadly Sins. Very, very strong, but also very, very tanky. It only uses your max magnetic force times 2%, and it has a duration of 15 seconds. So you can constantly just keep bashing stuff with your Q to build up your magnetic force because you gain more than you lose the whole time that this is up. The skill damage doesn't really matter all that much because the whole point of this is a survival and an additional helper for your teammates. Something to keep in mind is just whenever you get somebody up, pop it, make sure they're back in the fight, or make sure that you have it up at all times just so that way you're not taking a ton of damage, you keep your shield safe, but you're spending your magnetic force, which is fine because you will constantly be getting your Q back to gain more. There's also something else you could do with it, which is use it with your superconductive thrusters, which we'll talk about when we get there. But for now, let's keep focus on here, which is the damage power is only 702.8%. Of course, you can make it bigger, and then it also uses your consumed magnetic force, which baseline is 508.6%. So both of those together, you're looking at split percentages combined together, which can be a little sloppy because they are not added, but they're multiplicative. I hate that word. I'm sorry. I sound like an idiot every time I say it. I'm just going to say they're multiplied together from here on out, but that's the correct terminology for it. The damage range, radius of 5 meters baseline, but you can increase it. It's not really all that necessary. We get a little bit damage range specifically for our superconductive thrusters. The maximum expendable range is 200%, which isn't all that important, and the ally shield recovery amount is your max shield times 100%. Nobody should have more max shield than you in the rest of the game. At max level and with max amount of shield mods, not using some of the really scary ones, you should have about 8,000 plus shield. So you should be pretty good to pretty much get anybody their entire shields back the second you pick them up. It also grants you 25% damage reduction overall, which is kind of nice. Kind of not needed, especially because you're just dodging everything anyway, but it's useful. Last but not least, our bread and butter. This is our ultimate ability that many people call your 4 ability is your ultimate ability. This is our superconductive thrusters. Use your superconductive thrusters to soar into the air. You descend or ascend, it doesn't really matter. You can do kind of anything you want with it. Gliding with enemies and dealing damage upon impact. Damage increases proportional to the amount of magnetic force consumed. When the skill ends, magnetic force is fully consumed. So again, we can use this with our Magnetism spurt, and then both will simply collide and deal bonus combined multiplicative damage, and they'll multiply together and deal all that damage that they need to do. It's really nice. It also makes it so that you can fly through the air at the enemy, and if the enemy has you targeted and is shooting you, you don't take any of that damage and you don't lose your ability to deal all this skill power damage that we're going to be mentioning here soon. The cooldown baseline is 60 seconds, again, which is why we want to run a lot of cooldown to get this up as much as possible. Otherwise, we're simply just going to lose out to a lot of the other Descendants. A lot of the other Descendants are very much just constant DPS, or they have constant uptime on their DPS, whereas we are a burst and slash support character. So we want to make sure that we are able to support our team while also doing our own little bursts here and there to make sure that we are useful to the team, keeping the people that are actually important alive, such as the Glaze, the Bunnies, even though most of them are terrible. No offense to anybody maze, but you kind of are terrible. The Lepics, and anybody else who's going to be dealing a ton of damage. So, because this uses all of your magnetic force, the minimum use condition needs you to have 30% of your max magnetic force, which basically means after you shoulder charge once to twice, sometimes, depending on how bad your shield is or how low your shield levels are, you might need to do all 3, but you can then instantly use this ability. It won't do a ton of damage, but it'll do a little bit of burst. The skill power is 11,207.7%. A lot of skill power damage coming out right there. And then it's also using the multiplied damage of the consumed magnetic force of 7,809.8%. which basically means you are doing a lot of damage for no good reason other than to just say you could do a lot of damage. Sadly, again, on this, our damage range is only a radius of 5 meters. We boost it up just a little bit so that way if we are in the middle of mobs, if we're mobbing, we're going for areas that we need to get certain morphs from, we want to be able to hit everything in that area with our superconductive thruster, so that way we are just not hitting 2 or 3 targets, but taking out a good fair sum, so when we land, we're not getting absolutely obliterated. It lasts for 6 seconds regardless if you hit something or not, so make sure that you are absolutely using this to your best of your abilities to get across maps, hit enemies, explode everything, whatever you need it for. So, 2 of the most important things are when you finally get to this level and get to this character, is that you are going to need your modules and certain weapons first before you can get to where I am. So let's start off with your Descendant modules and talk about them in order of which ones are the most important for you to level up as you're going through and playing from normal to hard. So starting off, you can see that I have some of these abilities formed and some of these I don't. I said Forma, but I also mean Catalyst. I came from Warframe, so I know a little bit about how the system works, but I also know that I'm going to repeat a lot of the same words that just mean different things for different people. But when I say Forma, I mean Catalyst, and if I say Catalyst, I mean Forma if you're also a Warframe player. So keep that in mind. Alright, so let's quickly talk about our modules. So for Kyle, when we go in, we're going to be looking at these types of modules, and there's a reason that we take some of these, and I'll go in order of why, and some of these that we're actually not going to be taking. So, first one up is multi-maneuvering. You want this because 3 grapple hooks allows you to quickly roam around the map, and you can actually get 4 uses out of this if you know how to use it correctly, with doing the maximum amount of jumps and charges and doing the maximum amount of distance and using some momentum to carry you. You can get 4 charges out of this and pretty much carry yourself across the map. That's why we use it. HP conversion for shield, because we don't really need that extra HP, but we do need this max shield, and it's very, very nice overall. MP conversion for the max amount of skill cooldown, and because we don't use MP, we don't get any negatives, and this is just a really beefy skill cooldown for us. Increase shield, because again, we are a shield based character, so as much shield as we can possibly carry is going to be really, really great for us. Battle of Stamina gives us skill duration, which is going to be good for some of our abilities, and then also on top of that, max HP is also great because we're losing it from here, and this will allow us to have a little bit of a buffer to use our magnetic spurt, just so that way we have a little bit more extra time up on it and keeping ourselves good and keeping the shield popping back up after it pops our passive, so on and so forth, just so we don't go down and don't lose any DPS or uptime on anything. Particular focus on non-attribute, again, mostly for the skill cooldown, but all of our skills are non-attribute, so this just allows us to get a ton of skill power. Increase defense, because we need a ton of defense when we're going into these missions. Since we aren't going to be super heavy into one specific thing, defense is always just going to be good to make sure that we're not taking a ton of damage. And because using the elemental resistance type ones, such as toxic resistance, fire resistance, ice resistance, and such, you don't really need them as long as you have enough defense and you know how to play around them. So that's why we choose not to take them. Spear and shield, again, skill power, defense, all just very good for keeping up our damage on our skills, keeping us alive, and being able to use those skills for a lot of things that we need to use them for. Nimble fingers, again, skill cooldown. We are a very heavy skill cooldown based character. As you can see, I'm almost at 69%. Nice. Skill cooldown, so it allows us to basically have constant uptime on everything. Amplification control for skill effect range, which is really great for a lot of our abilities, as well as just giving us more max shield, which again translates to more damage as well as keeping us alive. And then non-attribute sin, basically it just gives us critical hit resistance, which is great because at higher levels those critical hits can actually one-tap you if you don't have enough defense, as well as just critical hit resistance, so it really helps out a lot. And then of course the non-attribute skill power. So you might notice that I didn't even mention the Transcendent mod that I have, the Superconductive bombing. Well, that's because this thing is a sham. It's very much like Lepix, where you would think the MP conversion one would be his best one, but it's actually his Fire Master. See, I thought this one would be his best in slot because it allows us to continuously drop bombs for our magnetic force, but we lose the additional damage from magnetic force when it's not triggered on collision. So what actually happens is you drop all these pea shooter bombs on top of a boss, and yeah, you just gotta hope you don't hit the boss when you do it, like hit their weapon or anything crazy like that, because they could just autofocus to you whenever, and then you just keep dropping it on top of them. They do pitiful amounts of damage, and your little soar through the air stuff does pitiful damage when you hit them. So this mod is a no-go. We'll probably be looking into getting the other mods, such as the one that pulls enemies in during our magnetism spurt, simply just for damage out, as well as consumption in, to bring them in and then we just knock them out. Or we'll probably look at getting the bulwark one. The shoulder charge one is also bad because it gets rid of our defense plus and applies a stun instead. That's not good because we want that defense up. It's 150% of our defense, which we currently have at 250%, an extra 150% boost to that. Pretty much makes us unkillable, and especially with all the low cooldowns we have, that's what we want. Next up is our Python. The reason we're going for the Python is for the simple reason that it helps with non-attribute damage. So, because we're using a non-attribute character, we want to use a weapon that gives us a damage boost on our non-attribute skills and such. Now, you won't be able to use both in conjunction, but just being able to completely help your other teammates who might be running non-attribute characters is going to be great. Especially if you're on Glay, this is also another really good weapon that I would recommend for her. Overall, just a really solid weapon. I haven't fully got this one down to a T yet, but this is where I'm at, where I want all my stuff to be currently. And it's good enough to get me all the way up to Obscutor, whatever the poison version of Pyromancer is on hard mode. That's where I'm at, solo-wise. So, we have weak point aiming. Need to level this up more, but it basically gives us accuracy and weak point damage. This is a very heavy weak point damage build, but it also provides a little bit of everything else that we need. So we also have action and reaction, which gives us a ton of firearm attack and gives us 20% recoil. The weapon, the Python, innately also has the 30% recoil, so we're already at like plus 50% recoil, but this thing's basically a laser pointer anyway, so you don't really need to worry about the recoil too much, but more on that later. Rifling reinforcement and more firearm attack, just absolutely great. Insight support ammo, I'm thinking of taking this one out and choosing a different one. I might go with fire rate up, I'm not entirely sure, but this one seems pretty solid for me right now. Basically, you just get an extra 9 bullets and it gives you a little bit more critical hit rate. I might swap this out for one that gives me weak point damage, or I might swap this one out entirely for the boosted fire rate and also a little bit of critical hit rate, because about 40%, 0.5% for your critical arm hit rate is pretty good. It allows you to get your crits in, allows you to keep pretty good solid DPS uptime, especially against other Glaze and other characters of that sort. And it also allows you to hit those weak points really, really hard when you get both in conjuncture, critical hit rate and a weak point critical hit rate. There are the differences in colors. I'll explain them real quickly. White is normal. Yellow is a critical hit. Orange is a weak spot hit. And a green is a mixture of the both that gives you a critical hit point. Critical weak spot hit point. God, that is such a mouthful. Weak point sight for weak point damage. Have aiming for more weak point damage and then the minus accuracy, hence why we're taking this, just to kind of make the accuracy a little bit better, but it's absolutely not needed. And the end game goal is to have this maxed out so the accuracy completely resets itself, because at base level accuracy the circle is so small, it's basically just, again, a pinhole, so you're just basically lasering the boss the entire time with minor recoil control. And the recoil is not anything crazy like CSGO or anything. You basically are just pointing and then slowly dragging your mouse down, or if you're on controller, just slowly dragging your aim control stick down, and you'll basically be on site the entire time. Better insight, firearm critical hit rate 39%. That's the highest you can get, so that's why we slapped this one on instead of the one that allows you to get a little bit of both, like target hit detection, which gives you critical hit damage and then weak point damage, and same with adventure, which just gives you a little bit of critical hit rate and weak point damage. Thought these ones would be good, traded them out. These are better. Fixed shot, again, this is just for getting minus on the recoil. The recoil is not super crazy right now. It's 12% because I have this on, plus the innate 30% from Python. So it's about 42%. But again, laser pointer, this is just on here to just help a little bit. And eventually I just want to get it so that I don't even have to move the mouse at all because I'm lazy as shit. Better concentration, firearm critical hit rate. Again, critical hit damage, critical hit rate, weak point damage, just bare minimums for the critical hit stuff. But you want a majority of just weak point damage on this weapon. Just absolutely shred through the weak points on bosses. Absolutely just melts them. Last but not least, sharp precision shot. Fire rate down, but get fire rate boosts, recoil down, and fire rate attack up every 0.5 seconds for 10 seconds or 10 stacks. It's just really solid overall. It's, again, this is more better for Glay, but we can still use it on Kyle. It's still really good. And if you build for both Kyle and Glay, if you ever get tired of Kyle and you want to just no brain and no life the game, switch to Glay. Use the infinite ammo mod, use this weapon, you'll absolutely just obliterate everything. You won't have to use the rocket launcher one. And you'll be good. It'll be really easy. When it comes to weapons, there's a lot of progression needed to be made to actually get to certain points in the game. And one of the few things that happen very quickly, very early on, is you're going to earn Bunny, and you're going to earn this submachine gun. It's called the Thunder Cage. Now, the Thunder Cage is a very good SMG that you can get a free charge of overcharge on it and upgrade it, as you can upgrade any of your ultimate weapons as long as you make the weapon the first time, and then you make it a subsequent 4 times and just combine them all together. Now, you don't really need to worry about the rolls as you're going through normal game too much. You just need to make sure it's on level and on par with a lot of the content that you're doing, and it'll do a lot of the work for you. Now, eventually the Thunder Cage will get completely outclassed, unless you're using this specifically for Bunny, by the Tamer. Tamer's a huge LMG that you can use to just simply crush through the rest of the content to get through the rest of normal and start your hard farm for your eventual endgame weapon, which will be called the Python. The Python is going to be your bread and butter weapon. It's going to be your endgame progression weapon, and the reason that we want this weapon is simply for its Python instinct. Now, this unique ability says whenever you hit a weak point, you inflict the ability called Prey onto a target enemy. Now, with the use of this ultimate weapon, there are downsides. Just like with any ultimate weapon, this one has an extra 30% recoil. Realistically, the recoil is non-existent on this thing, and it's basically just a laser pointer. But what it does is, for a duration of 1 second, you can stack it up to 20 times. The non-attribute resistance, which is great for us because we are a non-attribute character, will reduce the boss's non-attribute resistance by 2% per stack, and it stacks up to 20 times, so 2 times 20 is 40%. And this is at baseline with no upgrades. As you upgrade this, all these durations, max stacks, resistances, and all that stuff are going to get better and are going to upgrade, and the recoil is going to get lessened. It's a win-win situation. You're going to want to find a purple reactor, and the purple reactor will just have to have a machine gun fitting on it or a submachine gun fitting, depending on if you are going to be using the Thunder Cage or the Tamer towards your farming stage to get to the Python. Eventually, you'll be able to farm for a legendary one, such as this one that has a Python mounting, and it will have a non-attribute. And then we don't want dimension, but we do want tech. Tech is going to be the ones of our abilities that are going to be doing the most damage, such as our Q and our Z. The dimensional skill powers are our shield and our dodge tank ability, which aren't the greatest for us. Now, I've been farming a lot for one of these just simply for the showcasing of how much damage these abilities can do. And I don't have the greatest mods down below with the additional skill attack and the fire skill power ratio boost, because neither of those really do anything for my character, nor do they do anything to the Colossi. So ideally, what we're going to be looking for these two is golden modules that have anything to do with non-attribute dimension skill power boosts, or skill damage, or skill critical hit damage. We also want to look for more cooldown. There's never going to be too much cooldown on our character because of just how our skills work, that we just want to cap out as much as we can on them. So simply just putting that out there, if you can, a golden version of skill cooldown, and then ideally anything to do with boosting your non-attribute skill power is going to be best in slot, along with a Python mounting and non-attribute skill power, and then tech skill power boost. You can also look for that kind of stuff and see what is on rotation within your access pass again, and I'll show you how to do that right now. So what you want to do is open up your map, and then you need to press F. Now you need to be on hard mode to be able to actually learn and farm this stuff. So if you're on PC, it's F. If you are on your other such things like consoles, it's going to be different, but you want to look for difficulty level rewards and click that. Now this shows you the entire map, and it'll tell you the time to the next rotation and all that. So what we want to do is we want to look for a reactor, which is great. So now we want to look for one that is general rounds, such as Python, because that's what Python is, and click that. Now we can see already here that this is limited a lot of them on what we need and what we're looking at. So we go here, and then we want to click non-attribute. So it limits it even more and allows us to look further in for what we're looking for. And then sadly, there's only 2 this week, and neither of them are what we want, but we want to look for a non-attribute, general rounds, and tech. Whenever that happens, we want to hard farm until we get our golden one with Python and our desired stats. It's probably going to be your longest grind yet, but it is a very important reactor to get immediately, even before you get your Python. The moment you hit hard mode, you need to do this. Worst case scenario, like with me, you could just go with your second backup abilities, just because they'll be just as good, if not a little bit better, in helping you out and just progressing. That extra 20% is just super great. And if you can get one with Python, you can just lock it in, favorite it, keep it for later. But until then, just use a purple one that has a general machine gun attribute for it. After that, you want to head over to your access info, and you want to do what I'm going to be doing here soon, which is look for the Veteran Marksman Auxiliary set. Now, there's 4 pieces to this set, and just like with everything in sets, you want to look and make sure what you're getting is what you actually want. And the reason we want this is because, again, we are not a very heavy skill-based character. We will be doing a lot of skill damage and whatnot, but a lot of our damage is going to be coming from our weapon. So firearm critical hit rate is going to be great for us because it'll allow us to boost all of our damage. And then the 4 set will just give us a flat damage increase as well as weak point damage increase, which will make our weapon even better. Now, after we've gotten to that point, there are ways to get the ultimate sets. And these ones are incredibly rough for Kyle, to be honest. There's some really good ones like this one that gives us max shield and skill duration, which would be very, very useful for keeping our teams alive and keeping us alive. But we can't really stun Colossi, and even though we would get that random skill cooldown chance, it's not beneficial enough. But the max shield is really, really nice at getting another 12%, because that would just be another 12% damage. There's also the Slayer set, which would on paper be really, really good for us until we got to that 4th set. The reason it would be good for us is because it would increase our general rounds, which is great because that's what our Python is. But then it would also increase our rounds per magazine by 9% at the 4th set. And then it would also increase our skill cost, which isn't that bad because, again, we don't have any price to pay for our skills, and it would also increase the skill power. The only problem is when we defeat enemies, it recovers MP and our specialized resource, which is great, but again, it could be better. And the one that most people are recommending is actually the auxiliary power one, which I'm not a big fan of, mostly due to the fact that you have to have a certain amount of HP and whatnot, and unless it's counting in the module that we are using that cuts our HP in half, we technically wouldn't be getting the 4 set of this to go off ever, because at that point, all the HP that we are missing, we're going to be one-tapped the second our shields go down and we don't press V. So this does increase our skill duration by 5.7%, but it also would increase our firearm attack proportional to the ratio of max HP to HP lost up to 26%, which again, sounds great on paper, but unless it works that way with our HP reduction mod, this does not help us. So ideally, we're either going to be looking at getting the bravery set just for skill duration and a max shield and the HP recovery, because this would just help across the board, or we're going to be looking at the Slayer set simply just so that we can hopefully use this against Colossi and just have more ammo and more rounds pumping into the enemy at the same time. Now, just a quick overview of our secondaries. These are ones that I'm just currently leveling up, but these ones aren't really all that important. Your third slot should always be a power weapon, and I highly recommend the sniper rifle. A majority of all the sniper rifles are just going to be extremely good, so it doesn't matter any specific one you take, they are just going to be extremely good across the board. As for the scout rifles, these are 1000% going to be your secondary. The reason being is that because Colossi could teleport and move around very often, and if you have to go pick up any of your teammates, you're not going to be able to get the most amount of damage off with your Python due to distance fall off on your damage. This allows you to take pot shots until you can actually close the distance and still get a lot of damage off, because scout rifles are incredibly strong and powerful, especially when hitting weak spots just like your Python. So I highly recommend taking a scout rifle as your secondary. Now that we've gone over everything for Kyle, let's just do a quick rundown of all the bosses on normal, even with our max stuff, just to see how it looks and how we could do it on solo, and then eventually showcase how it would look on hard, not doing anything solo, but just going with the party, and showing how some of our skills can correlate with each other and just kind of crushing everything out.
alive.
Just a quick thank you to our current members and our very first member to join, Mr. Rito. Thank you for selecting to be a Daddy Otter. Of course, anybody can become a member, but thank you for selecting it, and I hope you enjoy the perks and privileges that come with it, such as being able to join the in-game lobbies, early access to other videos, and of course, your special RGB name in the title card before we cut out the video. And special thank you to anybody who joins before / or after this happens and comes out. You guys are amazing, and thank you guys so much.